2, 1, and we are back recording with Mr. Did I mess it up again? Posner or Posner?
Yeah, Posner. You got it.
Yeah, I thought I had it. Yeah. So I'm an idiot in my mind, in my sleep-deprived mind. I had just been associating. I don't know why. I did this once in college where I was sure that D-Day was June 4th, not June 6th, and emailing you this last week, I was like, we're going to do a Monday 11:23 episode for JFK's assassination. Then I was like, it dawned on me yesterday. I was like, no, the 3 is from 63. It's 22. And I was like, I'm such a moron.
No, that was so fabulous because, I didn't even ask you and say, by the way, the 22nd is the anniversary, because I just assumed that you only do podcasts like Monday to Friday. You don't do them on Sundays for some reason. So I thought, okay. And as a matter of fact, there were some people who did podcasts with me this year for the assassination on other days, because they just don't happen to do them on Sunday. So I get it that the assassination fell on a bad day for podcasts.
I do podcasts every day of the week. I did 2 yesterday. And
all right.
I made a post on my Reddit for my podcast. And I was like, having on this guy, and he's going to come on for the 23rd. And it wasn't until I looked at it. I guess I just haven't been sleeping enough. I looked at a comment yesterday, and it says, yeah, first question. I thought the assassination was on the 22nd. And I was like, oh, no. And I just figured you were just being kind. And we're like, sure, we'll do it Monday. So I'm an idiot.
Good.
So,
yeah.
But Mr. Posner, damn it. Sorry. Author of Case Closed. And I finished this past week, or yesterday, last night. And I emailed you, and my first thoughts were Lee Harvey Oswald is, I mean, aside from just, killing a beloved president, killing a president, what an asshole, just in general.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, as a matter of fact, it's very interesting because you haven't read other assassination books, but if you read assassination books that say there's a conspiracy in the case, there's, the big plot and everything else, the amazing thing, Tommy, is they don't really talk about Oswald. He becomes this stick character, this guy who, you just get a feeling, oh, it's impossible for him to pull off the assassination because he's not that clever, not that bright, not a great shot. So how could he have done it? But the one thing from reading about Oswald is he's also so unreliable, so into his own world, that no plotter, no big conspiracy could ever rely on a guy like him to pull the whole thing off. Nobody's going to do a plot with him because he is definitely on his own.
He's, and you're absolutely right, because, and I'm someone that leans towards the fantastic, and I'm someone that wants to believe, right, of whatever it is. And listening to your book, which will be available in the top comment and in the description, it's fantastic, is go into it. And I remember at first I was just thinking, I was like, okay, we're going on Oswald. And as the book progressed, I was like, when are we going to get to the assassination? But then I realized, I was like, oh, the importance is you understand who this guy is. And as it goes on, you don't even need to make the argument. Just listening to it, you start to conclude on your own. This guy couldn't hold a job for more than 10 days. This guy couldn't tie a shoe. Well, that's not true. That's exaggeration. This guy was nuts. He was grandiose, delusions of grandeur, thought he was the best thing ever. Just, I'm going to move to Cuba. I'm going to move to Russia. I'm going to move back. Beat the shit out of his wife, slapped his pregnant wife, alcoholic. This dude was nuts.
But okay, but not and he has this terrible childhood. You get that. We have a psychiatrist that looks at him when he's a kid and thinks he has these dangerous acting out personality traits. He goes in the Marines thinking he follows his brother, thinking that's going to change his life and make it better. It's an unmitigated disaster. People think he's gay. They throw him in the shower. They call him Mrs. Oswald. When he, goes over to the Soviet Union and defects, he thinks he'll be greeted as a hero, and they say, get lost. And he tries to kill himself. And then they move him out to this little provincial capital in Minsk. By the time he leaves the Soviet Union and comes back to the United States, you're right. He's just somebody who is this loser in life. But not everybody in his situation is going to turn to political assassination. And it's not like he has committed himself to doing that, months before Kennedy is killed, as you find out in the book, from trying to kill this right-wing Army general, retired Army General Edwin Walker. So Kennedy's just the bigger name on that comes up on the silver platter to him. But I think that, when you say you like to believe in the fantastic in that, Because I conclude in the end from this book that Oswald alone killed Kennedy, doesn't mean I don't believe that there were conspiracies brewing against the president. There were clearly conspiracies against him. Look, if today you had a political assassination on President Trump, or you had one when President Obama was in office, if you knew who the shooter was, you then have to figure out whether they're doing it for themselves or they're doing it as part of a plot or for somebody else. Are they inspired by people who are Islamicists? Are they inspired by people who are anti-American, who are anti-abortion, pro-abortion, whatever?
Sure.
The same with Kennedy. There were mobsters, and the mafia hated him because Kennedy's younger brother, Bobby, was attorney general and going after the mafia. There were people in the CIA upset. There were anti-Castro Cubans who were upset because Kennedy had abandoned them at the Bay of Pigs.
Mm-hmm.
There were all types of people that had a motive to want Kennedy dead. And I wouldn't be surprised, Tommy, if you were able to bring to me, let's say tomorrow, a tape recording in which a group of mafia guys sat around a table and said, let's get that no good president. We're going to kill him. The plots were brewing.
Yeah.
It's just that Oswald beat them to Kennedy. They would have pinned a medal on him, but we assumed that since he killed Kennedy, it was one of the plots that had him do it. But in fact, he wasn't their boy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you had, if some whack, and I guess say waves to the Secret Service, I guess if some whack job just shot Trump today, that doesn't mean that the CCP hates him any less.
Right.
It just might not mean that they were behind Bubba from downtown who is mentally unstable and got his hands on a gun and an open shot.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that, one of the things too is that in political assassinations most of the time, or in shootings even of celebrities like John Lennon or that take place, we are accustomed as a country and worldwide to see somebody with a pistol running up to the person, shooting them, and then they get tackled at the scene. You know who the shooter is right away. In the case of Kennedy, it's the first time in modern American history, and one of the few times in modern American world history, where a rifle shot takes place from a long distance, so you don't see the assassin right away. A long-term rifle shot on a moving target raises all the image of Hollywood, paid assassins, Day of the Assassins, and Jackal. Then the assassin disappears in the immediate aftermath of the assassination. So you've got questions about, the guy they catch a few hours later really the right guy?
Yeah.
And then 2 days later, he gets killed in Dallas police custody by a guy who looks like he's out of central casting as a wannabe mobster. But so no wonder people think that there's something wrong in this. I understand why people think there's a conspiracy. I used to think it was probably the mafia, so I get it.
Yeah. No, and I will say, I had a cookie right before this. I'm clearly beginning my Thanksgiving feast beforehand. I look like a moron. But yeah, no, that's absolutely what it is, right? Because it's not, it's not running up to Andrew Jackson and both pistols misfiring. It's not, it's not firing at Reagan. It's not Gavrila Princip, right, going right up to Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Right.
It's none of it, right? It's from a distance. It's in this weird echo chamber of a plaza. It's 3 shots, manages to, and then vanishes. And then, Jack Ruby, who looks like he's out of a Martin Scorsese film. Like, just like, he looks like a wise guy. It's almost like cheesy how much of a wise guy he is. But you're right. You go into it, but after listening to your book, and I think that's maybe what it takes, is you got to sit down and just listen to a 20-hour background, 75% on Oswald and 10% on Ruby, and you go, this was just 2 crazy people.
Yeah, and and what you just said, Tommy, it's interesting because some people will say to me, okay, I can believe that there's like one real sociopath in life that day in Dallas that weekend, but you mean to tell me that 2 of them crossed paths, by coincidence on that Sunday?
Yeah.
And as you said, because the assassination does not lend itself to a soundbite. So it's not like I can go on TV and people say, tell us in 30 seconds why it's Oswald alone, because you really need to understand Oswald and then Ruby to some extent to understand what happened. And most people who are into the assassination as assassination researchers, they're focusing on what I call the things in the assassination itself. What about that crazy bullet? They say the single bullet that jumped all around. What about Kennedy? Was he shot from the front? What about a grassy knoll shooter? And for me, That's all critically important. The forensics, the evidence about ballistics. But even if you come out of Dealey Plaza, as I did after examining all the evidence, with the view that Kennedy was clearly shot from behind, and that the only person who was shooting in Dealey Plaza that day who hit Kennedy was shooting from behind, you then have to determine who was the shooter. And even if you determine it's Oswald, which I do, you then have to find out, was he part of a plot or doing it on his own? So I always think that the ballistics of the assassination, what happened in that plaza, are only important if you can establish a second shooter. If you don't establish a second shooter, which the evidence doesn't show that, then you have to start asking the questions about, okay, who did it? If it's Oswald, what did he do it for? And then if Ruby killed him, was Ruby doing it as part of a plot or not? In the end, the answers are pretty simple, but I think that for a lot of people, they just scratch their head and say, no, it's not possible.
Yeah, no, and I didn't think about it like that, right? It almost kind of seems like who took who, just like I just did. My mom went out and I ate some of the Thanksgiving cookies, right? I can't let her watch this till after Thanksgiving. But it's like, who took the cookies? It was one of the boys. It wasn't me, so it must have been me and my brother. Well, my brother was out of town. It must have been the dog. The dog died. But it's like this ballistics, okay, like irrefutable evidence, okay, from behind. Okay, so it was Oswald. Who was behind Oswald? Okay, no one was behind Oswald. Who's behind Ruby? And you just you're just moving the goalposts till it's like, sometimes shit just happens.
And one of the things, and I think you see this in the book, to me, if you say what's the most critical period, believe it or not, it's in late September, early October, when Oswald goes to Mexico City, because he's trying to get down to what he thinks is now, he's always changing the new revolution. It's going to be Castro who's the greatest. So he's trying to get there. And, he leaves New Orleans on a bus on like September 25th. That night is when the White House announces for the first time that Jack Kennedy's going to go to Texas for this tour. They don't even announce the cities yet. So the point on that is Oswald gets rejected in Mexico City in the next couple of weeks by the Soviets twice. He has to go to the Soviet mission to get it. And then he goes to the Cubans and they don't give him a travel permit to Cuba. If the Soviets and the Cubans had given him that travel permit to Cuba, he wouldn't have been in Dallas on November 22nd. He would have been down in Havana. So I doubt that anybody really thinks the Soviet mission and the Cuban mission in Mexico City were part of the plot, that they said no to Oswald so that he could go back to Dallas. Yeah. And when he gets back to Dallas in early October, let's assume he's going to be part of a plot. The plotters have to bring him into the plot. They didn't know Kennedy was going to be there until he returns to Dallas. So somebody has to reach out to him. They can't do it by telepathy. They have to telephone him. They have to get him. And he's living in a rooming house with other guys. And they all are, questioned after the assassination. He makes a telephone call once a day or every other day in a foreign language. That sounds really interesting until you find out he's talking to Russian to his wife, who's living outside of Dallas, who he visits regularly. He doesn't get any visitors. There's no telephone calls from the place that he ends up landing a job at through a friend to anybody unusual. Nobody shows up in a dark coat and a big hat over his eyes and says, try to bring you into the plot. So the failure, in my view, to those who think it's a conspiracy, is to come up with just one iota of evidence that ties Lee Harvey Oswald into a group of plotters to kill Kennedy from early October to the time of the assassination. And there just isn't any.
No, there isn't. And to me, and it may sound like an obscure fact, but to me, what really, I'm not going to lie, like it sounds odd, but what put the nail in the coffin for me was the segment about his plan to hijack a plane, which isn't whatever. Okay, D.B. Cooper, that happens later, but still happened back then. Running around the apartment, jumping up and down off of furniture to train his leg muscles for the high. To me, that was like, oh, he's insane.
Or sitting on the porch in New Orleans and just operating the bolt action of his Mannlicher Carcano rifle, or that. It's so fascinating is that one of the things we're lucky about in history, and I view this as a historian or investigative reporter, what's important to be able to determine, you say you read the story, you listen to the story about Oswald, and you're convinced of what type of character he is, and the same with Ruby. But Oswald wasn't alone. He wasn't in a vacuum where he's on his own. You don't know what he's doing, and you have to sort of guess at it. It was with his wife Marina, who later provided this testimony that was compelling and detailed. She's the one who talked about the Walker shooting when he tries to kill Edwin Walker. She's the one who knows about it. And there's even today Marina has now come to the view that there's a conspiracy in the case, because not based upon what she knows, Tommy, based upon what people have told her. They've come to her and they said, you know, we think he really worked for the CIA. We think there was an imposter Oswald. We think that, you know, all these things from Oliver Stone movie. And so she said, oh, that's interesting. Maybe there's a real plot here. But she hasn't changed one bit of her testimony of what she knows from her own firsthand experience. And her experience in recounting of the Lee Harvey Oswald that she knew is the guy that you can understand taking those shots at Kennedy on November 22nd, 63.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to be devil's advocate, like the only conspiracy I could see, it wouldn't be Oswald. It would be, let's say they wanted Kennedy dead. I don't know. I mean, just really loosely, maybe just schedule a bunch of open top motorcades through a lot of cities. I mean, that you know, that's pushing it, but like, that's like the only real justification I can come from is like, maybe if we drive him through a lot of cities with a open air convertible, maybe he'll shot. That's about the only, yeah.
I mean, I have no doubt that people celebrated Kennedy's death.
Sure.
You know, no doubt about that. He was a loved president, but there were also people that absolutely hated him. And so I think that one of the things as well that happens on this is that it gets lost after the fact. Once Kennedy is dead, people go forward largely thinking that everything that would have happened in a Kennedy administration would have been perfect. They see it from their own political prism. So people that don't want Vietnam say, you know what, he would have been smart enough to get us out of Vietnam. People that think he would have done civil rights faster and broader than LBJ did. Everything in the Kennedy administration would have been better, and therefore there would have been no Vietnam. There'd be no Watergate. America would have been a happier place. And as a result, in that loss, they can't quite believe that this just turned 24-year-old sociopath, this loser in life, was able to end all that possibility. Now, of course, it's guesswork about what a Kennedy administration would have been, sure. But still, filling him with all the ideas that it would have been ideal and perfect is another reason you can't quite believe that it wasn't a massive conspiracy to get rid of him.
Yeah, right. And you always see that. Right? Well, if Gore had won, we never would have had 9/11. If McCain had won, we would have had a better Obamacare. If Clinton had won, we wouldn't. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. And of course, right. if we had just elected the other person, we'd now be in utopia. But unfortunately, no, it doesn't. And you had one line in it that actually I would say above the whole flight hijacking. The one line that made me really think is if you take the greatest evil, right? 6 million Jews, not to mention all the gypsies and antisocials and homosexuals and Poles, but let's just take 6 million Jews. A lot of people have died before, but no one has quite ever been systematically and industrialized murder process, tattooing the numbers, getting the gold out of their teeth, putting them in the showers, like with trains and names. And that was so evil, right? So greatest evil ever, 6 million killed in a monotonous fashion. On the other side of the scale, well, what caused that? Just like you see a big asteroid impact. Oh, what must have taken out the dinosaurs? And then you find this in the Yucatan Peninsula. You go, that makes sense. 6 million dead, women, children. Oh, it must be the Nazis. It balances out in your mind. Kennedy, Camelot, him and Jackie, just, right out of a Norman Rockwell painting. And we weren't going to go to Vietnam. And then what can we say he did do is he sidestepped World War III from the Cuban Missile Crisis. Oswald drinking his wife's breast milk, running around an apartment naked, jumping on sofas to practice hijacking a plane, had fake names to make his Fair Play for Cuba committee seem bigger, failed at his own suicide in the Soviet Union. Man, your heart doesn't want that to be true, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Look, it's very unsatisfying if you think, this cheap rifle, he pulls off the assassination, by a bit of luck, and what you want, and I get this completely, a conspiracy. If you add to the Oswald part of the scale, the fact that it was really, in fact, the Russians, the KGB, the Cubans, the mafia, the CIA, whatever you want, it gives some meaning to Kennedy's death, as though these great evil forces had to get together in order to stop him. And that's a more satisfying thing. I think the same thing happens on 9/11 with truthers to some extent. Yeah. I mean, they can't quite believe that, the 20 hijackers ended up pulling off the successful hijacking of these planes, and 2 brought down the towers and 1 hit the Pentagon. That's not enough for them. They have to believe that it was much more than that. It was really a secret, nefarious government plot and to bring us into war and all that. And so the problem is that I know as a reporter that conspiracies exist, and I know that sometimes governments work against our own best interests. And we saw that in the lies over Vietnam in terms of the body counts that were given. We saw it in Watergate. We saw it in Iran-Contra and those. But it doesn't mean that it happens every time. And occasionally you have to be, I didn't have my mind made up when I started this project. And I told you before that I leaned to thinking it was the mafia. But the great thing is you have to follow the evidence. So when I came to this conclusion, I remember sitting down with my publisher, Random House, about a year before the book came out, maybe 9 months, and saying, by the way, I think you can say in this book who killed Kennedy, because that wasn't the original purpose, to name it. And they said, who? And I said, Oswald. And there was literally a moment of silence around the table. And the chief editor-in-chief, Harry Evans, said, and who? And I said, just Oswald. They thought I had lost my mind, that I'd gone off and read the Warren Commission and come back and that was it, because they were hoping that I'd come back with, here's the absolute evidence that you cannot deny of a conspiracy that points to X, Y, and Z. As a reporter, as a writer, you always want to come back with the most sensational story, but you can't if that's not what the evidence shows. So sometimes you come back with a story that doesn't have the big home run conclusion. What we underestimated, we meaning myself and the publisher, and this was back in '93 on the 30th anniversary of the assassination, was that saying it was Oswald alone had become the most controversial position. People thought they said, what? That's like saying you just landed on the moon or that. Yeah. They were ready to hear it was a conspiracy, but when somebody serious came forward and said, I think it's Oswald, they would say, you got to be kidding. Yeah. And then, you had to go back and explain why, and the why actually leads you to why it happened.
Yeah, right. And then you can move the goalposts again, right? Ballistics, Lee Harvey, Jack Ruby. Well, now it's very clear that you are a CIA plant, right? And this book is all disinformation. The jig's up. I got you.
So, I have to tell you something which was really remarkable. I really underestimated this. And Tricia, my wife, works with me on these. We've done books. We had done books before that on the Chinese syndicates, triads, and the heroin business. Have done books since on 9/11, political and other stuff. Never, we received like nasty emails or nasty mail and all that, but never received physical threats in which a police file had to be opened up until I did a book in which I said Oswald alone killed Kennedy. There were people who went ballistic on it. We were assaulted on the street. I had a problem assaulted at the airport at one point, got a dead rat's tail sent in the mail, got dead fish sent. And I didn't realize why until later. If you truly believe in your heart that the president was killed as part of this massive government plot, secret murder, and it's worked because almost 60 years later, no one's really found out how it happened. So they got away with almost a perfect crime. And then some guy like me, some Johnny-come-lately, comes along 30 years after the assassination, writes a book called Case Closed, and the mainstream press loves it. It was a finalist for the Pulitzer, and it gets a lot of attention. That must mean that's part of the conspiracy. The government has gone back to get some new guy to come forward and write a book that says it's Oswald, so I must be a CIA agent or some such thing. And people therefore think I'm part of the murder plot. And boy, I'll tell you, it was wild. When I say I understand it, I certainly don't approve of it, but I understand how some people get very exercised about that. It's remarkable to see.
Yeah. And then I'm having you on my podcast. Clearly I'm part of it too.
Well, you've just been duped.
Oh my God. It got me, all along. The sign was right here. You couldn't tell, but yeah, I got you for 5 or 6 more minutes. I want to say, so Jack Ruby, that's another one where you have to go in and you have to look at this guy's history. This guy is like, I don't know if you've ever seen Anchorman, the movie, but he reminds me of Champ Kind in the movie. If anyone's seen it, they'll know. But I mean, just this, it's almost what today you would call virtue signaling, right? That's what I got out of it. It's like, this is the equivalent of like changing your Facebook profile picture after a shooting. Like, you're not going to do anything, but you're just like, Boston Strong or like Paris, and like, hey, I'm not to belittle these mass shootings, but I mean, come on, like you're doing that because you're like, you're a young guy and you're going out with a bunch of progressive girls, and you're like, I changed my profile picture. Like, you want to get a drink? Like, that's what Jack Ruby was doing, right? Just going up to everyone, just hello, sir, how can I help you? Would you like a sandwich? Can you believe they killed the president? Yeah, yeah. Can you just calling a girlfriend you hadn't talked to in 11 years? Hey, how you doing? Jack, is this? Can you believe that poor family? It's like this dude is just milking it.
Absolutely, and once you know Ruby, where do you expect him to be on Friday night when the assassination taking place? Right where he was, City Hall, where all the down at the police station, where all the press
Yep.
from all the world is
Yep.
handing out his business card and saying, by the way, when this is all over, be sure to stop by the Carousel Club.
Place.
Yeah, my place. Now, what was really amazing to me about Ruby is, and this is the part that's so difficult for people to get. There's two parts. First, with Oswald, I don't think Oswald's assassination attempt was a suicide mission. So what I mean by that is, if on that day, let's say his coworkers hadn't left him on the 6th floor, they'd stayed up there to have lunch, he wasn't going to take the rifle out and take a shot at Kennedy. If when he got into the window, there were Secret Service agents posted at the building across from there looking right toward him, he wasn't going to shoot at the president. So the assassination has to break right for him. It's almost like if it's right, he's going to do it. And for Ruby, on that Sunday when he kills Oswald, he doesn't go downtown to send that MoneyGram to one of his strippers who needs it. If they haven't delayed transferring Oswald because he asked for a change of clothes and some postal inspector had shown up to interview him that delayed him leaving, when Ruby walks back down the street and gets that opportunity to go back into the jail by down that ramp, it's literally that timing of fate where the two cross paths. Ruby sees him, sees that what looks like that smirk on Oswald's face, and pulls out the gun and shoots him. But I will tell you that it's not planned in the sense that Ruby's looking to get down there and he's looking at his watch and thinking, oh my God, I better get this MoneyGram off because I've got to kill this guy because I've got an assignment from the Chicago mob and I'm running late. It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, and Ruby himself is, I would say the only person left behind Oswald. The craziest person in Dallas that day was Ruby. This guy's nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting that he thinks of it sort of as a plot against Jews. The original posters that were posted against Kennedy. By the time that he's in jail, he thinks that. And so, people often say, well, Jack Ruby was saying that he thought there was a conspiracy behind the assassination. I say, yeah, you have to listen to that conspiracy. It's pretty far out there.
Yeah. And I would say the biggest one is, again, just like it may seem like an obscure fact, but I mean, this dude loved his dogs. He was a dog person. He was a dog parent. My fur babies. Like, hey, like everyone, my dog. I put him down this year, but I mean, I was my dog's dad, right? This dude was a dog nut. He never left his dogs in the car, and he was downtown and just so happened to get out, and that's when he went and killed Oswald. But he left his dog in the car. To anyone else, that might not seem it. But imagine everyone listening, those dog nut friends you have, who I get it. I mean, I love dogs too. You're leaving the dog in the car. Imagine if you had a friend that decided to leave the dog in the car one day. You'd be like, what the hell? When do they do that, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that because, so it's all cumulative. It all adds up in the personality characteristics to explain why something happens. You look at that about the dog, little Sheba, as he calls it, leaves them in, these two dachshunds that he has inside his car. And that's another factor. Now, if you say that on your own to somebody, let me tell you why we know that Ruby was doing this on his own and didn't plan it. And you talk about the dogs, they just think, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. You need to see it in the whole context of Ruby and how he acts that weekend. And then that's an additional factor, as you would say, another nail in the coffin as to how it happened.
Yeah. And I would say a huge nail that's more of an ongoing thing is just like you have I know I gotta let you go in a minute, just like you have that whole history of Oswald and you just see how just weird he is also how Ruby's hair triggered temper. I mean, his whole life was just, even as a kid, I mean, they called him Sparky because he just lost his temper and just beat up people and then immediately after be like, oh, I'm sorry, I lost my cool. That's what this guy did. And then he thinks JFK is the best guy ever. Maybe he idolizes him because of his successes as opposed to Ruby's failures. Then he sees the guy that killed him and it's just.
And I also think that just in wrapping up on this, I don't think Ruby thought he did I mean, he knew he was doing something wrong, but not wrong in Jack Ruby's world.
No.
That guy had killed the president of the United States. He had ruined the reputation of Dallas. And in Jack Ruby's world, it's street justice. He was going to mete it out. And I think Ruby expected people almost to pat him on the back and saying, you know what? Good job, Jack. You did it. And there was a law in Dallas then in Texas called murder without malice, maximum 5 years in prison. That's what he thought he would do, max 5 years in prison. Of course, it didn't turn out like that at all. But I didn't think Ruby thought he was going to serve big time. He'd be something of a hero.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like Lee Harvey thought he would get a big press pool response when he came back to America. They were both delusional. And sometimes, sometimes it's the unsexy truth that 19 guys with box cutters can take down $1 trillion defense net. Sometimes
That's right.
It just happens. But I'm at 12:30, and I said I wouldn't keep you any longer.
Thank you.
Your book that I'm going to do next, and obviously I'm just assuming I'm going to have you on again, is It's America Slept, right? While America Slept.
Why America Slept. We'll get back to the 20 hijackers.
Yeah.
All right.
That's not on Audible, and I'm very upset about that, Mr. Pollard.
Yeah, I know. We got to get that in Audible. I can't believe all these years later it's not. Okay. It's a small book. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll send you an email, man. Thank you so much. Case closed in the description in the top comment. Awesome book. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.